One. All right, everybody, welcome to our Thursday or Tuesday night podcast. On today's episode, we will be going over our team of the week, player of the week, coach of the week from the previous weekend, and then we will dive into our game breakdown, starting with non-SEC and then rolling into SEC games. So I'll get us started on team of the week, player of the week, and coach of the week. So my team of the week this week is Arizona State. They were an underdog by 7.5 points at home against the Texas Tech Red Raiders, and they took care of business. They ended up winning this game 26-2, heavily off the passing game of Sam Levitt, 119 yards and a touchdown pass for him. Their defense really stepped up. Texas Tech to 276 yards of total offense, and 22 points. And that's a team that was averaging close to 600 coming into the game and averaging about 48 and a half points a game. Then I move over to my player of the week, and that's Marcel Reed for the Texas A&M Aggies. He threw for 280 yards, 3 touchdowns, and then ran for 55 yards and another score. So at 335 yards of total offense and 4 touchdowns in a bit of a shootout game on the road against Arkansas. So we'll see what he can do in his next couple of road games. And then for my coach of the week, I've got Clark Lee, head coach of Vanderbilt. First time they've been a favorite against a ranked team and since like the 90s, and they took care of business against LSU at home. A big win for them, big game for Diego Pavia and the tight ends over there at Vanderbilt. So that's my team of the week, player of the week, and coach of the week. Who do you have, Kevin?
Yeah, so team of the week, I'm going to go with the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets as they won a road game against Duke. I put them in a very good spot in the ACC. They have 4 games left. They'll be favored in all 4 games that they have left. They do have a road game against NC State in a couple weeks. They host Syracuse this weekend, and then they host Pitt November 15th. And that could be a tough game. So, but they're in a position that they could go undefeated in through the ACC. Last game of the season, they host Georgia, and Tech could go into that game undefeated. They're a team they're just solid. They're opportunistic. You cannot look at the stats and judge them. You have to watch them play. A little bit like Vandy. I know we talk about Pavia a lot, but Pavia's passing numbers aren't, extreme. And Haynes King's the same way. And so but what you can pencil Haynes King in for is he's going to throw for about 200 every game, and he's going to run for about 100 every game, and he's going to get a lot of first downs. Very similar to how Pavia plays. And the Georgia Tech doesn't turn the ball over, and they don't have a lot of penalties. And they're very opportunistic. They did return a fumble for a touchdown in that Duke game. And so just a really, really well-coached football team, very similar to Vanderbilt, and undefeated. So that's my team of the week. Player of the week, I'm going to go with Gunnar Stockton. Again, that Georgia and Ole Miss game. Ole Miss played very, very well against Georgia in that game. So if you take both teams, the first 11 drives resulted in points. The first 6 by Georgia, they had a couple field goals. Ole Miss, their first 5 drives were touchdowns. So, and they were ahead 35-26 at one time. And so with the way Ole Miss was playing offensively, Stockton had to step up and play well on offense and really have a great offensive game, and he did. He totaled about 350 yards total, 289 passing. The key point in this is he averaged 9.3 yards an attempt. If you average 7.5 on a passing attempt, that's pretty stellar. And he was 9.3, so he had a great game passing, 26 of 31. And then he had right at 60 yards rushing. Had 4 TDs. Passing and a TD rushing. Gunnar Stockton had a great game, stepped up when they needed him. One more play I want to call out in that game because it'll go unnoticed by the end of the season. They're down. Georgia's down 35-26, and they got a 4th down at midfield. And Josh McCray was hit right around the line of scrimmage, fought, stayed on his feet, slid out to the right, pushed forward, and got that first down. If Ole Miss gets that ball at the 45-yard line of Georgia's, up 9 and scores, Georgia's not coming back from that. So just want to call McCray out for a great second and third effort getting there. But Stockton's my player of the week. Then coach of the week would go to Kenny Dillingham from Arizona State. If you look at Arizona State this year, they're not great in any statistic. They average about 380 yards a game on offense and give up about 350, 60 on defense. But Dillingham's a really good young coach, and Sam Levitt's a good leader for him. And Dillingham's really done a good job of coaching Levitt up over the last 2 years. But they played Texas Tech. Very few people gave them a chance to win that game. And they were ahead and really controlled the game into the fourth quarter. And Tech had a couple special teams plays and went ahead 22-19. And then with the clock running down inside 6 minutes, Levitt got the ball and Dillingham, and he's an old offensive coordinator. Not an old offense, but that's what he did before being head coach. But he calls the plays there a lot. They put a good drive together and beat a Tech team that is probably a lot more talented than Arizona State. But Dillingham did a great job coaching them up, and they got the win. So that's my three. Sweet, what do you got this week for those categories?
All right, since I'm out in Salt Lake City, Utah, when me and my lovely bride moved my mom across country, I'm gonna go ahead and take a Utah lean to it. My team of the week is the BYU Cougars. They beat the University of Utah 24-21 in Provo this weekend to remain undefeated at 7-0. They're ranked 11th in the country, and they everything's out in front of them. They finished the season undefeated. Obviously, they're going to be in the playoff, and they're just as good as anybody in that conference right now. My player of the week is Bear Bachmeier. Freshman quarterback Bear Bachmeier went 13 for 22 with 166 yards, 1 touchdown, no interceptions. He had 11 carries for 64 yards and a touchdown. Picked up first downs every time they needed them late in the game to keep drives going, to keep their offense on the field. And he's just done an outstanding job for the Cougars this season. So since the player of the week and the team of the week at BYU, I'm going coach of the week, Kalani Sitake. Kalani is up and coming. He's even on some short lists for some of the open jobs in NCAA right now. So BYU's got it going right now. I don't know if they will get to the playoff. Texas Tech is there waiting on them. It's the Big 12 is not the toughest conference, but it's there are a lot of teams that are still in it there, and a lot of upsets that can happen. A lot of spoilers there. So those are my three. What do we jump to next, DMAC? Yeah, we've got a couple questions that we'll go ahead and answer. The first one is, what are our thoughts on Saban, what Saban had to say about Penn State firing Franklin? I think this is from College Game Day. Saban wasn't a fan of how it happened. I gave my thoughts last week about how, I don't like the firing either. With Kurt Signetti was a name that was tossed around early. He's now not a guy you're going to get. So really, where does Penn State turn here? Kevin, you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, one thing that Saban said that I really thought about after he said it and have to agree with him is the fact that that Franklin was held to the expectations that he basically created at Penn State. Because when he took that job, Bob O'Brien did a good job of stabilizing the program, and they had some 7-5 and 8-4. So he got them after all the probation penalties and stuff they went on. O'Brien kept them from going in the ditch and the gutter, but getting them back to a level where they were winning 10, 11 games, competing in big games against ranked teams. Franklin is the one that did that. So, Saban basically said, you created the expectations and they held you to those expectations. And he didn't really feel like that was fair in the middle of the season, especially when you look at the last few years where they had won 11 or 12 games. I tend to agree with that. I do. Look, again, if a program wants to make a change, I can understand some of that stuff. But, I think there's a lot to be said for keeping your team. If you're winning 10, 11 games a year and you're close, you're like right there on the edge, you're just a player away. And I think, that's where Penn State was. And so sometimes it's just that 1 or 2 years that you're away from getting that right group of people to win a championship. I think Saban kind of has distorted college football expectations. He won 6, if you count the one at LSU, 7 national championships, but 6 at Bama. So I think some fan bases think that their team is going to win multiple national championships, that you can just go out and recreate that. Well, if Saban was still coaching today, it wouldn't be the same. there's more parity with NIL in college football. I mean, we're seeing it. You look at the SEC, the average margin is less than 10 points a game, across the SEC. So you're going to have, most coaches are fortunate if they win one, maybe two national championships. Urban Meyer, I think he won three. Dabo's won a couple. Kirby's won a couple. It's just not the norm to go out and win a national championship. So to me, you want your team competing every year. That helps your recruiting, that keeps your fan base into it. And you land that one special talent that gets you over the hump. I think that's where Franklin was. So I tend to agree with Saban. I think that they probably jumped the gun on that. Sweet, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. The timing was a little peculiar, and we had spoke about it offline. Maybe he pissed off the wrong set of boosters or somebody in the administration or a combination of the two. There's something obviously there more than just the football aspect of it that got him ousted in the middle of the year. So the timing of it was a little screwy for me. But also, I mean, listen, if you're, if you decide that, that you're going to part ways, I guess Penn State figured, we know we're done with him, so let's not carry this out any further. So it's kind of a, catch-22 for me. But yeah, those are my thoughts on it. Where we going now, Kev?
Yeah. Well, we got one more question.
This is going to be an interesting. Deep.
Who do y'all think? Yeah, who do y'all think should replace Brian Kelly? So this is in the hypothetical world that there is a change made at LSU. I'm gonna let you two go first, and then I'll give a third coaching option. Sweet. So we're gonna get started with you. Who do you think should replace Brian Kelly if there's a change made?
Yeah, I've thought about it. There are a variety of coaches I'd like to see. First of all, I'd like to go younger, somebody who's got the energy, who's a go-getter. I'd be happy with a Dillingham. I'd be happy. I like Jeff Brom a lot. He's middle-aged like myself, so he's not a young man, but he wins games. He wins big games. And thanks, Kev. I am still young. Thank you. He wins big games, as he did Friday night in Miami. He's got a track record, so he'd be one that I'd kick tires on as well. A few others I'm thinking about, but I haven't thought about it enough because it's a pipe dream for me. So I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. What are your thoughts on it, Kev?
Yeah, so I got a couple here, but let me say I like your Brom thought. We talked about it, and we both like Brom. And one thing Brom gets credit for being a good offensive coach because he was an OC, but his Louisville team's got a really strong defense this year. So he coaches both sides of the ball. He wins big games. I think we wwere texting the other night. He's 4-0 against top 10 teams at Louisville. I mean, again, he won games at Purdue. So the guy's proven, and you put him at a big school, I think he only gets better. So I'm going to go, D-Mac, I'll let you go with the one we talked about the other day. So I'm going to go with two names. So I will say this. I want the guy that's hungry to win a national championship. So to me, does that mean you go out and hire the coach that's you're going to pay 10, 11 million for? I'm not sure of that because that's really hard for any person to stay hungry on. I don't mind if a coach makes 10 or 11 million. Let me be clear when I say that. I just want them to work their way into that. Start them off 7, 8 million. So that may rule out some of them. So my coach, if you were going to pay that, would be Marcus Freeman. I really think, and he's still hungry. He's obviously hadn't won a national championship. Very young. I've always been impressed with him when he was even the DC at Cincinnati, and people said that was Fickell's defense. Well, not taking anything away from Fickell, but I think since we've seen Freeman as a head coach, I think we can safely say that was his defense at Cincinnati too. He's a great defensive coach, but I also think he's very organized, very smart guy, and does a good job and understands he has to have a good offense to be successful because he made a change between his first and second year at Notre Dame because he wanted a different style offense. Brought in Mike Denbrock back there. And again, both sides of the ball play well. Special teams plays well. So that's enough there about him. Now that's my pipe dream. Then I will go with the next guy that I think would be that young and up and coming guy that you can pay $7 million or so for now. And then as he wins and continues, he can make more. And I'll go back to Kenny Dillingham at Arizona State. You look at a guy when they're an assistant coming up and who they coached under. And, he coached under guys like Lanning, Cristobal. He's coached under Malzahn. So he knows the game. He's highly thought of. And then he goes from that to a head coaching position, takes a job at Arizona State. Yes, it's his alma mater, but that program was really down. And last year took them to the Big 12 championship, played Texas in the playoffs. And, it was a one-score game. And he can coach physical in the running game like he did last year with Scatterbo. And then he also can develop a quarterback like he has with Sam Levitt. And his teams play physical and they play hard. And that's another thing that I would say all these coaches that we're talking about, they all like physical football. And I think you've got to make that an element. Number one is that a coach is willing to coach a physical football style, because you're not going to win a national championship unless you can play between the trenches. So I would go those two. DMAC, you may not go with who I'm thinking of. I know we talked about it the other night, but if you do go with that guy, I really like him too. But I like all the guys we mentioned. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm going to mention an LSU kind of pipe dream, a personal pipe dream, and then a realistic candidate. So LSU's pipe dream, I think, is Lane Kiffin. He's probably going to be in that 12-5 range in the next contract that he signs, whether that's at Ole Miss for a ton of money or he pursues Florida and LSU, a school like that. So I don't think he's a serious candidate for the Tigers if a change is made. Now, personal pipe dream, I'm going an NFL offensive coordinator with this one, and that's going to be Todd Monken. You look at Georgia, the 2 championships they won, Todd Monken was calling that offense. He took over a disastrous program at Southern Miss where they went 0-12. His third year and final year there led him to a 9-5 season. So he would be my personal. Now, a realistic coach, I'm gonna go with the SMU coach, Rhett Lashley. I think he's a really up and coming coach. Got SMU to the college football playoff last year. Right now, he's still got them sitting in contention to make a conference championship game in the ACC. So he would be an option outside of the ones that you guys mentioned that I'm a fan of. So Kevin, who was the last guy you were thinking of?
So I'll mention him, but let me say something here with Lashley. Lashley, if you go his last 3 years, he's lost one conference game. Well, last 2.5. He lost one conference game when they were in the American and they beat Tulane in the conference championship. Last year he was undefeated in regular season conference games. This year he's 3-0, so that's a good choice. If you can go out and win your conference games and go on the road and win, and he's proven he can do that. That means a lot. Last one that I will say, we talked about him the other day. I love this guy because to me he's all guts. And again, he took a team that when he took it only won like 11 of their last 45 games. And that's Brent Key at Georgia Tech. And again, you talk about he's an ex-offensive lineman. That's where he played. He played at Tech. And so he believes in physical football. He coaches his guys up, a lot of passion with it. I don't make this a prerequisite. I just say this because he demands and has expectations. So last year, he replaced an assistant coach in the middle of the season. And I'm not saying that's what you want to do, but the point being is, though, if you're the head coach, and this is where I think LSU's missing a little bit right now, you have to have expectations. You have to play to a certain standard. You have to play to a certain effort. Position-wise, coaches have to put in a certain effort. Players have to do certain little things. And that's the things where Brent Key really impresses me is he's just a, all guts type of guy. We're going to do things a certain way. We're not going to have penalties. We're not going to have turnovers. We're going to play a tough brand of football, and he coaches guys hard, and he demands that out of his staff. And so I would love him. If you told me tomorrow that we could start next season with Brent Key, I would be very happy.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's a good pick. So that brings us to our non-SEC games. So first game of the week we'll talk about is UCLA traveling to Bloomington, Indiana to face the Hoosiers. Yeah, I'll get things started on this game. UCLA has been really hot since making the coaching change. They beat Penn State, they beat Michigan State, and then they beat Maryland. And on the flip side, Indiana's playing really good football. Yeah, just signed a huge extension with their head coach, Kurt Signet. Makes him the third highest paid football coach in all of college football. and really starts on the offensive side of the ball for them. They're averaging just a hair shy of 500 yards a game, running for 226. And their defense has been really solid this year too, averaging giving up 248 yards a game and only 11.6 points per game. So they've got some really good things rolling on offense as well. Then you look over at UCLA. The numbers are skewed a bit because of how the season started, losing their first 4 games. But they're running the ball for 171 yards a game, which I think is closer to about 220, 225 since the coaching change was made. So I think the line in this game right now is 24.5. I think Indiana wins this game. And there's one key number that I always love to talk about, and that's turnover margin. And Indiana is ranked in the top 10 in the country at +7 in the turnover margin. I think that's a big key for them to not only win this game, but continue to keep their streak alive. So I'm going to go. I don't think this game covers, though. I'm going to go Indiana 41, UCLA 24. So what's that, a 17-point win for the Indiana there? Sweets, what do you think of this game? I know I didn't really talk players.
No worries. You covered what you need to cover, buddy. Listen, Indiana, you talked about their offense, but they're seventh nationally in total defense, giving up 248.7 yards a game, sixth in scoring defense at 15.6, and number 9 overall in defensive stop rate. So it isn't just offense that's getting stuff done in Bloomington, it's the defense as well. Nico's got things going in UCLA, as well as little Neuheisel. So good for him. He looks like a 12-year-old out there on the sideline coaching that team, but I'm here for it because he's doing a great job. I think Indiana wins the game. I just think that they're just too much for UCLA. They're too talented, and they're on a roll there at home. And I think Cignetti's got them really rolling. I'm gonna take Indiana 49, UCLA 24. I'm not sure I can't remember what you said the line was, but I'm gonna go 49-24 Indiana. What do you got, Kev?
Yeah, so man, I would love to think that UCLA could make this one interesting, and they have played so much better. Totally different team since the coaching change, and it's just kind of hard to believe what kind of change it's been because they were losing to bad teams, lost to New Mexico State, and then all of a sudden now they're 3-0. Look, Indiana's though they're playing a physical team on both sides of the ball, very very well coached team. I think Indiana wins this game, but I think UCLA will compete and make it interesting for a half and give me 37-20 Indiana to win. I think UCLA is going to continue to show life and improvement. I would love to see this game get into the fourth quarter close, though. Don't think it can happen.
So that brings us to our next game, which is going to be Illinois at Washington. Kevin, what do you have on this one?
Yeah, so again, this is two teams that are both 5-2 when you look at them, and similar in a stance that solid defensive teams, good offense, really depend on their quarterbacks. When you look at Washington, they're averaging 437 yards a game. Damon Williams has been very good. He's got 1837 from a yardage standpoint, 72% completion rate. He's been a huge part of their offense. And then you have Jamal Coleman, who leads the team in rushing with 568. And so, they're solid. This is a home game for them, and they're a 4.5-point favorite. And then you flip over to the Illinois side. Over the years, Bielema's had a really good running team, but this Illinois team is all really pretty much quarterback centered with Luke Altmaier. Again, he's also completing 72% of his passes and about 1,300 yards passing. So he's been really good. And so they're going to depend on him to move the ball. I really think this is going to be a close game. You've got Bielema, who's always been good with execution. And then you have Fish, who's the Washington coach that was at Arizona before, and he's done well. And he's kind of an up-and-coming guy, too, that might end up in some mentions for coaching positions. Again, both these defenses are kind of similar. Illinois is giving up 371. Washington a little better than that, though, 332 yards. And Washington's defense only gives up 234 passing. So I think they'll contain Altmaier. They won't shut him down totally. And Washington's only given up 20 points a game, where Illinois is giving up 25. Some of that's skewed, though, because Indiana popped 66 on them. So, but I think Washington will win this game in a close game, right around that spread margin. But I would probably say Washington to cover. Give me Washington 31-23. What you think, D-Mac?
Yeah, so I really like the Washington offense in this game. They're converting about 53% of the time on third down, which puts them in the top 15 in the nation. Illinois is 119th in third down defense. So I think that's an area of the game that that Washington can be really successful in. So I'm gonna go Washington 38, Illinois 24 in this one. Think they're going to cover this spread pretty easily. Who do you have, Sweets?
I got it 35-24, same team, Washington. To me, it comes down to the red zone defense versus Washington's red zone offense. Illinois' red zone defense they give up, they're 113th in the country. 91.7% of the time a team gets in the red zone, they're going to score points against them. And that's just awful. And I think that turns out to be the difference in the game. You know, we've talked about it before. It didn't work with Indiana and Oregon, but more often than not, when a team travels from the East or the Midwest back to the West Coast and playing a game like that, that time difference really messes with you a little bit differently. So I think that that's going to be a factor too. So put me down for Washington 35-24. Who does that take us to? Does that take us to Minnesota and Iowa?
All right, so that brings us to Minnesota. Yeah, take it away, Sweets.
Gotcha, buddy. All right, the 5-2 Gophers versus the 5-2 Hawkeyes. They're both 3-1 in the Big Ten. This game's going to be in Iowa City at Kinnick Stadium. Should be a really good game. PJ Fleck's got them rowing the boat in Minnesota. They won a big game recently. They're playing well. They've got let's see. Goodness, my screen slipped there. Iowa's favored by 8.5 here. Wow, that seems like a lot for an Iowa team that normally hasn't been a scoring team here. I like Iowa to win the game, though. I think Mark Gronkowski, he's completing about 65% of his passes. Not as big he's 3 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, but he's also a rushing threat too, and gets things done. Iowa's got a veteran offensive line, and they can control the trenches against Minnesota. I'm going to go ahead and take the Hawkeyes here in a lower scoring game. I'm going to say Iowa 24. 21. I don't think they cover, but I do think they win the game. What are your thoughts on that game, Kevin?
All right, Kevin, what do you have on Minnesota, Iowa?
Yeah, so this is 2 physical football teams that play for the Floyd of Rosedale Trophy, which is, I guess, a very prestigious pig. And over the years, it's been a very competitive game. So I'm going to take Minnesota. I think they're coming off that win last week. I think they looked really good against Nebraska. And I think they're going to continue that. They really got their running game going last week for the first game, and so of the season, and they've been a good passing team. So I think they'll continue that. Give me Minnesota in a tight game, 21-17. What about you, D-Mac?
Yeah, one thing I like about both of these teams is they play clean football.
Dude.
Iowa leads the country, only averaging about 20 penalty yards a game. And Minnesota ranks in the top 10 with about 32 yards of penalties in games. You know, we're not going to see laundry all over the field in this one. Iowa's an 8.5 point favorite in this one. I'm going to roll with Minnesota for 2 reasons. PJ Fleck's their head coach, so I don't have much faith in the Iowa offense, similar to a few other teams in college football. But Minnesota's +5 in the turnover margin. So if they're able to go on the road, force some turnovers, I think they can win a close one. I'm going to go 17-10 in this one. Minnesota wins the game. So that brings us over to probably the best non-power conference game of the week. You get USF traveling to Memphis, and what's going to be possibly the American team that gets into the college football playoff out of this one. What do you have on it, Kevin?
Yeah, so this is probably my favorite game of the weekend. I've been a big South Florida fan for the whole year, and going on the road to Memphis is going to be a tough game for them. This is a game they got to win if they're going to make the college football playoffs. And it's 2 good, well-coached teams. Alex Golesh and Ryan Silverwhite at Memphis. They're 2 really well-coached teams. South Florida's offense, 76 yards a game that they're putting up, averaging 41 points a game. They're very balanced, 260 yards passing, 215 yards rushing. Byron Brown, dual threat guy. He's what their offense is centered on. He'll throw the ball and then he runs the ball well. So I really think, I think a lot of South Florida. On the other side, Memphis has been very good at home, and they're a pretty good defensive team. They only give up 335 yards a game, the top 40 in the country. Brennan Lewis is the quarterback, and he's been solid, and they upset Arkansas at home, and they were behind 18 in that game and had to come back to beat Arkansas. So you can't count them out, and playing in Memphis is going to be very tough. Again, Memphis has only given up 18.3 points a game against that South Florida team. And South Florida is a solid defense, too. They give up 375 and 23 points a game. So, but, again, you got to make a call, I guess, here at some point in a game. And I'm going to take South Florida. I've been riding with them all year, so I'm not going to fade on them now. So give me South Florida in a very competitive game. And they're going to win this game 30-27 and propel themselves to the clear front runner to be that non-power 4 playoff team. What you got, Sweets?
I I was just thinking. I got South Florida winning the game 27. I think they're going to go. I think they're going to beat Memphis. I think that, like you said, Kev, you've been on them all year. You've been on Auburn all year too, and that hasn't worked out so well. But I've followed you on the South Florida one because I believe in them as well. I think they get the job done here at 27 and keep their playoff hopes alive, and that should finish Memphis' playoff hopes for the season. Who you got in this one, D-Mac?
Yeah, usually I'm able to pick a team on the turnover margin stat. Both of these teams are really strong there. Memphis is 14th in the nation at +6. South Florida ranks in the top 10 at +7. One thing that I give the edge to Memphis in is South Florida is averaging about 65 penalty yards a game, which if you give away free yards when you're on the road, that's not a recipe for success. One other key thing is South Florida's 133rd in the FBS, averaging about 25 minutes and 40 seconds a time of possession. Memphis is averaging close to 32 minutes. So I think Memphis is going to be able to shorten this game a lot. So I'm going to roll with Memphis in this one. And I'm going to roll a 1 game here. Touchdown win for the home team in this one. That brings us over to the Battle of Kansas. We get Kansas State traveling to Kansas. Who do you like in this one, Sweets?
So this is the Sunflower Showdown. These guys play for the Governor's Cup every season. In this game this weekend, Kansas is a 3-point favorite. They're 4-3. Kansas State's 3-4. They're both 2-2. In conference. Kansas is led by, quarterback Jalen Daniels, who's thrown for 1,752 yards, along with 18 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. Very impressive. They're led by wide receiver Emmanuel Henderson at 530 yards through the air with 4 touchdowns, and linebacker Trey Lathan has 49 total tackles on the year with 1.5 sacks and 1 pick. Kansas State, on the other hand, is led by receiver Jace Brown with 417 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns, and quarterback Avery Johnson, who's got 1,561 yards through the air with 13 touchdowns and 3 rushing touchdowns. This is going to be a really close game. I know there's no love lost between these two teams, and on these interstate rivals, they hate each other. At the end of the day, though, I think that Kansas State gets it done on this one. I think Kansas State wins straight up, and I'm going to take them 27-24. I just think that Avery Johnson is just going to give Kansas too many nightmares with his legs there. What are your thoughts on this, Kev?
Yeah, so it's an interesting game, and you mentioned Johnson, and he's got 13 TDs on the season throwing and only 2 interceptions, and then his counterpart on the other side at Kansas. Both of these teams are really driven around their quarterback. And so you got Jalen Daniels at Kansas, who's got 18 TDs passing on the season and only 2 interceptions and completing a high percentage rate, and really, really built around that. Both teams run the ball, and their quarterbacks are both running threats. I guess I'm going to say, when I look at both these teams, one, let me say this: Kansas State's been playing really well. They beat TCU convincingly at home 2 weeks ago. They got off to a tough start, but they're playing much, much better. So I like that pick. However, playing in Lawrence, I'm just going to trust Jalen Daniels just a little bit more. And I think Kansas is going to win this game in a high-scoring affair. Give me Kansas 34-31, a game that really is a toss-up. D-Mac, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I love the Kansas State offense when they're in the red zone. They're scoring about 95% of the time when they get in the red zone. And on the flip side of that, the Kansas defense is ranked in the allowing teams to score about 96% of the time when they get in the red zone. So, this is going to be a tough game with how good Kansas State's offense is in the red zone and the fact that they're +6 in the turnover margin. I'm going to take K-State in this one. I'm going to go 31-27. K-State gets a win in this one. So that brings us to, I believe it's the BYU Iowa State game. So I'll get things started off in this one. BYU coming off a huge win against Utah last week. That was a late night Saturday game. So I think they're going to have a little bit of a letdown game, though, against Iowa State. They are a 2.5 point dog at on the road. So I don't know if I'd call it a letdown, but I think Iowa State's still got a little bit to play for. So they're going to come out tough. I do like the Iowa State offense a lot, averaging 405 yards a game. Their defense is doing pretty well in the scoring defense category, only giving up 19 points a game. And I really like Rocco Beck. Hasn't thrown for a ton of yards, around 1,600, but he's completing the ball at about 68% on the year. And they're running the ball pretty well with Sama averaging about 6 yards a carry. Then you go over to the BYU offense. Bear Bachmeier, I know that was your player of the week this week, Sweets. I've talked a lot about him this year. He was a guy who was kind of thrust into this starting position, and he just ran with it as a young freshman. So Iowa State is coming off their loss to Colorado. So I think this is going to be a really good game for about 3.5 quarters. I would expect BYU, not after that Utah game, but I'd expect them, if I was just blindly looking at this game, to blow Iowa State out. I'm still going to roll with BYU to win this game, but I think it's going to be a lot closer than, I would normally think. So I'm going to go 34 BYU, Iowa State 31 in a close game where BYU doesn't look great, but they do enough to get 8-0. Who do you like in this one, Sweets?
I'll start with saying I like BYU 38-27. I think that BYU knows that what they've got in front of them. I think this is a veteran team, and with COVID combined with that 2-year mission that you get to go on sometimes with BYU, you've got some really mature players on that Cougar team, and they can handle this type of stuff. When you've got two kids, college football game isn't all that serious for you. And some of these players out there are married with kids and all that. So I think BYU is going to handle their business this weekend. I think Bachmeier is going to continue to do his thing, and I'm going to make a prediction right now. The linebacker Isaiah Glasper is going to get a pick six off of Rocco on Saturday in this game. So that's my prediction. Who do you got here, Kev?
Yeah, so if you mentioned the letdown potential of this game coming off the Utah game. Really, if you look at the last 2 weeks for BYU, they've had two really challenging games. They beat Arizona in overtime in a game they had to come back to get the game into overtime. Had a really good drive in the last few seconds of the game and to send it into overtime. So you had the emotional high of winning that game in overtime, getting back down to earth, playing it at home and beating Utah, which, Sweet, you talk about the maturity it takes there. And I think it does. But I just think in this game, after 2 weeks of riding that, and you go on the road, and Rocco, is a good quarterback. He's proven that he can win close games. And I do picture this one to be a close game. And even though I've been a Bear fan there for BYU, but I just think when it comes, if I'm in a close game with both the quarterbacks, I like Rocco just a little bit better. And I think it's going to be a fairly low scoring game. I think I'm going to give Iowa State the win here, 24-21 over BYU, to give BYU their first loss in that conference, to throw that whole conference in a uproar. We've said Iowa State's a spoiler. I think this is the game they play that spoiler role, and I really think in that Big 12 championship, one of the two teams in it will have 2 losses, and I think this gets us headed to that direction.
This brings us to another Big 12 game. You've got Houston at Iowa State. Get things started on this one for us, Kevin.
Yeah, so Houston and Arizona State, you got two really well coached teams, very similar in that neither one of them have been explosive offensively this year, but they both are sound. Houston's averaging 380 yards a game. Arizona State 398. Defensively, both these teams have been good. Arizona State's given up 327 yards a game. Houston 317, and Houston's given up 19 points. Arizona State's 24.3. Arizona State scoring 26 a game, for Houston scoring 29. So when you look at that margin there, Arizona State, even though they only have 2 losses, their margin of victory is very tight, which it was again last weekend. And Houston's been a little bit better with a 10-point margin of victory. Both of them have quarterbacks that I would say are solid quarterbacks. Sam Levitt, I think, is a really good quarterback, and I think he has a chance to play at the next level. But their numbers are similar. He's at 62% in his completion rate. Connor Wegman, who's the A&M transfer, the same thing. He's at 62% in his completion rate for Houston. And both of them have, around 1,300 yards passing for the year, and have been good for their teams. So from that standpoint, I think you'll see similar offenses. I just think Houston with a little better defense might eke this game out. I say that Arizona State, they did win that game last week, and I'm going to go Arizona State. Let me go Arizona State in this game. It's going to be a low scoring game, 24-17 over Houston. What you think, Sweets?
So I'll start with my prediction. I'm gonna pick Houston to go on the road and win this one 27-24, and I think they're going to win because I think that offensive line is going to push Arizona State around a little bit this week. They've won the Big 12 Offensive Line of the Week 2 or 3 different times during the year in conference.
All right, I think we lost Sweets again.
You pop back, D-Mac. You want to roll with your thoughts on this game?
Yeah, I'll take this game. So everything in my mind tells me to take Arizona State in this one. My key metric that I judge teams off of is turnover margin, and they're +6, which puts them in the top 15. But I think after that big win at home against Texas Tech, they're playing at home again, but I think they're going to come out a little sluggish, and I think Houston eventually does just enough to win this game. Even if Arizona State wins, I don't think they cover the 7.5, but I'm going to go 21-17. Houston edges out a win here. Looks like Sweets is back. Back over to you on this one.
Oh, Lord. Sorry, guys. I like Houston 27-24 here. And as I was trying to say before I got cut off by this lovely Wi-Fi out here, that I think their offensive line is going to be the difference in the game. I think they're going to have their way with Arizona State's defensive line, and I think they're going to keep them on, keep pushing them back. Connor Wegman has been, sufficient at quarterback. Dean Connors has 138 rushing yards on there. I look for him to get about $140 Saturday against the Sun Devils, and I like the Cougars to go into Arizona State and leave 7-1 on Saturday. Where does that take us next, D-Mac?
Yeah, it takes us to Stanford at Miami. I'll get things started on this one. So Miami, suffered their first loss of the season last week, and Stanford had a huge win last week. So I think this line is, Miami is the 29.5-point favorite in this one. I still think that Miami is the best team in the ACC. Their defense is still a top 15 defense, only giving up 290 yards a game, only 92 yards on the ground, and only allowing opponents to score 15 points a game on them. On the other side of the field for Miami, they're passing for about 270 a game, running for about 145, good for 410 total yards. Carson Beck has kind of had an up and down season. He was playing really good up until last week, where he threw 4 picks, still completing 73% of his passes. Mark Fletcher is running the ball really well, 45 yards on the ground and 6 touchdowns. So he's averaging a little over 5 yards a carry in the ground game. And then Malachi Toney, the young wide receiver, has 510 yards on 38 catches and 3 touchdowns. He's so elusive and has really played well this year. Then you look over to Stanford, who's sitting at 3-4. but they do have that big win over Florida State last week. Their defense is allowing about a 435 yards a game. They're kind of getting gashed in the pass game for about 310 yards. When you flip over to the offense at Stanford, it's not much better. They're averaging about 320 yards of total offense, only passing the ball for about 225 yards a game. Micah Ford, though, is a bit of a bright spot for them with 425 yards on the ground. So Miami's doing really well in time of possession this year, averaging about 33 minutes a game. So I don't think Miami covers this game. I think they're gonna come out, want to get a little revenge on the next opponent they face. I'm gonna go a 42-21 game. Miami wins this but doesn't cover. Who do you have, Kevin?
Yeah, I think Miami will bounce back strong this weekend. I don't know what has happened to Florida State when you bring that game. I'm not a believer in Stanford. I think Miami will come out. Miami's good defensively. Their offense will get back going. Carson Beck will eliminate the turnovers this weekend. I like Miami to win this game 41 to 14. So I think Miami will cover and play well. They got to make a statement to get back into that conversation because there's so many teams in that ACC that have one loss. So they have to have a statement this weekend. Sweet, what's your thoughts?
I'm with you, Kev. I think Miami blows doors. I like a 52-10, 52-14 type of game here. And the key matchup for me is Carson Beck versus that Stanford secondary. He had a rough week against Louisville last week, but Stanford has they've got one interception on the year, and they've just been blistered through the air so far this season. So I think that Beck's going to bounce back strong. Look for him to have 3 or 4 touchdown passes, go for 300 plus, and I think Miami just they get their revenge and Cristobal knows that he needs to look impressive now with that one loss, because if another one comes, they're going to be at that 10-2 marks, and it's not a guarantee that an ACC team sitting at 10-2 is going to get into that playoff. So they know that they need to look as good as they can. Where do we go next?
Yeah, it takes us to Baylor and Cincinnati. Get us started on that one, Sweets.
All right, number 21 Cincinnati is playing their Big 12 homecoming matchup versus Dave Aranda's Baylor Bears. Cincinnati is 6-1 so far on the year, 4-0 in the Big 12. Baylor's 4-3 on the season, 2-2 in the Big 12. Lost their last game to TCU 42-36, and they had a few just turned the ball over, and that's DMAC's stat. And I'll tell you what, when you give the ball away, when you give possessions away, it always comes back to bite you. Cincinnati is still in the hunt for a playoff berth here. They're playing well. Offensively, they're scoring 37.9 points a game, which is 15th in the country. There's not too far behind them at 36.3. They're both moving the ball well through the air and on the ground. At the end of the day, Cincinnati's got a lot to play for here, and I think they continue to play well. They're going to shut down Sawyer Robertson, and Brendan Sorsby is he's leading the country with 24 total touchdowns. And I think that Cincinnati goes ahead and beats them pretty good here. I like Cincinnati 31-17 here. Who do you got in that game, Kev?
Yes, Cincinnati's probably the team. We talked about how Mississippi State has came out and played much better than expectations. When you look at a national level, Cincinnati is probably the team that has exceeded expectations the most on a national level. They're 6-1. They're undefeated in the Big 12. Baylor's competitive in every game they play, home or away. I boil this game down to both teams have offenses that can score and move the ball. And so Baylor's averaging 36 points a game. Cincinnati's averaging 37 points a game. The difference in the game to me, though, is on the defensive side. Cincinnati's only given up right at 19 points a game, whereas Baylor's given up 31 points a game. That's 118th in the FBS. Turnover margin, Baylor is -7. So to me, when you go on the road, you show the propensity to turn the ball over, and your defense gives up a lot of points. That's just not a winning recipe to me. On the flip side of that, Cincinnati does have a lot of penalties. They're 119, accumulating 70 yards in penalties. But again, at home, I think Cincinnati's going to win this game in a fairly high-scoring game because both offenses can score. Give me Cincinnati 37, Baylor 31. What's your thoughts there, D-Mac?
Yeah, so I have the same exact score as you in this one, but I have it the other way. I'm not counting out Dave Aranda. You know, I think he can on the road force a late turnover and win this game. So I'm going to roll with Baylor 37-31 in this one. And that brings us to our SEC games of the week. So we do have two SEC teams on a bye, Florida and Georgia. So to get things started, we've got Ole Miss and Oklahoma, an 11 a.m. Central Time kickoff. Who do you like in this one, Kevin?
Yeah, so, again, I said I like South Florida and Memphis as my game that I really like the week. When the SEC games of the week, this one would have to be the game that I like the most, just from a fan standpoint, if you just want to watch a game. So both, but now here's one thing let me say on the front side of this. We talk about turnover margin. Neither one of these teams are going to, make their fans happy with a turnover margin. Oklahoma's -5, Ole Miss is -4. So you take that stat into consideration. When I go down through the things, both quarterbacks, Chambliss has been good. Mateer's been really good. He wasn't last week at South Carolina, but for the year, he's been really good. He struggled a little bit against Texas, too. So, I guess when you look at getting into SEC competition, that could be affecting him. And he has 6 interceptions. And when I get back at the end of the game, that's kind of where I'm leaning on the difference. Going into last weekend's game against South Carolina, Oklahoma had not been able to run the football. Torrey Blaylock last week had over 100 yards, and Xavier Robinson had 50 yards, and they had about 160 yards rushing in that game against South Carolina. Now, South Carolina's run defense has not been good, but neither has Ole Miss's. So I think you're going to see Oklahoma try to ride the same recipe as they did last week at South Carolina, with stronger running game and not as much emphasis on Mateer's success to get the win. On the other side of this, though, man, you look at Ole Miss offensively, they are just so strong offensively. Um, right at 500 yards a game in the which is eighth in the country, 304 yards passing, 187 yards rushing. You have Kawan Lacey, who has over 600 yards rushing. So I really think that's where I look at the difference. I think all other things are fairly equal. Oklahoma's front seven is good, better than Ole Miss's front seven. But I just think between what Ole Miss is able to do, how Kiffin can call plays, create matchups. He did it on the road at Georgia last week, and they put up 35 points. I don't know that they'll put 35 on Oklahoma, but if they put 27 up against Oklahoma, I don't know that Oklahoma can get more than 27 against Ole Miss, even though Ole Miss's defense is not the best. They've played a little better lately, though. So giving up 22 points a game is theirs, where Oklahoma's only given up 9. But, look, we saw that when they played LSU. Ole Miss is going to get in the 20s. So I like Ole Miss. I've rattled a lot of different things there. I like Ole Miss in this game, 27-21, 27-20. Let me go 27-20 Ole Miss as Kiffin keeps his team in contention for the playoffs. What you think, Sweets?
I'll start with my prediction. I got Ole Miss with a late field goal winning 24-21. But I tell you what, this is a great matchup. You got one of the greatest offensive minds in the game in Lane Kiffin versus one of the best defensive minds in the game in Brent Venables. So Oklahoma's got the #1 defense in the country, and they're just flat getting after it. They hit you, they come aggressively, and they scheme well. They're doing all they need to on defense. To me, it comes down to Mateer and whether he'll be able to get off against Ole Miss's defense or not. I think he'll have a limited success, but I think at the end of the day that Ole Miss being at home with that crowd, I think that's what's going to push him over the top. So I think that Kiffin keeps his playoff hopes alive, 24-21 Rebels. What do you think here, D-Mac?
D-Mac, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, so, the Ole Miss offense has been really good. When they faced the LSU defense at home, they struggled and only put up 24 points. I lean towards the Oklahoma defense as a whole. Maybe LSU has a cornerback that's much better than any corner that Oklahoma has, but I would take their front seven every day. So I think this is going to be a low scoring game, but I think Oklahoma squeaks this out. I think this is going to be a game that you see Ole Miss's offense struggle for the first time this season, and I mean really struggle. I'm going to go 20-17, Oklahoma wins this game, only gives up 17 points to Ole Miss. So
Let
that
me
brings
let me give you a matchup before we move on. You remember how Auburn attacked Guillory, their cornerback for Oklahoma, with Coleman? Again, I think you take Lane Kiffin, he'll put Lee and the other wide receivers that he has in that group. They will attack Guillory if you give him a weakness. So that's where I think look for that matchup. Look for Ole Miss to attack that freshman cornerback to put points on the board. But I like your pick, D-Mac.
So that brings us to the Auburn at Arkansas game. Arkansas is a 1.5 point favorite in this. Well, 2.5. The money's moving towards Arkansas in this one. I think Arkansas, they're fourth in the country with 513 yards a game, total offense. They're throwing the ball really well. They're running the ball really well on the offensive side of the field, led by Taylon Green, who's thrown for just under 2,000 yards and 17 touchdowns. Mike Washington, the running back's got 670 yards on the season, averaging almost 7 yards a carry. And then Omega Blake is their best wide receiver with nearly 600 yards and 4 touchdowns. I think the matchup that I want to see the most is this Arkansas offense against this Auburn defense. The Auburn defense is only allowing about 18 points a game, which puts them in the top 25 in the country. They're only giving up 316 yards. So you've got a really high-powered offense going up against the defense that's been pretty good. Now, Auburn is a little vulnerable in the pass game. They're giving up 230 yards, which puts them ranked around 85th in the country. On the rushing side, they're only giving up about 80 yards a game. So I'm going against the metric that I love. Arkansas is -5 in the turnover margin, and Auburn's +4. But I'm rolling with the high-powered offense of Bobby Petrino to win this game. I don't have much faith in the Auburn offense. Jackson Arnold I think he's still averaging about 170 yards passing a game. So give me Arkansas and what's going to be a little bit of a high-scoring game. I'm going to go 34 Arkansas, 21 Auburn.
Blowout.
Kevin, who do you have?
Yeah, so your stat with your turnover margin, it means a lot. Keep in mind, Arkansas had 3 turnovers against Tennessee. That kind of elevated that turnover margin there. And they still, kept that game close. So this is an interesting game because you have Arkansas with a really good offense, Auburn with a pretty good defense, secondary that can be thrown on a little bit. Then you have Arkansas who can't stop anybody. The 3 of us might be able to score 17 against Arkansas against an offense with Auburn that can't score on anybody, that can't get in the 20s. So, what gives there? So, I also look at what team is probably going to come into this game in a better mental approach. And Bobby Petrino has Arkansas competing. They played A&M tough last week, lost by 3, 45-42. They the week before that they lost 34-31 to Tennessee. So he has them competing and I think he'll continue to push the fact that they're competing, they're playing better to get them over the hump this weekend. And on the other side, you have Auburn, who's 0-4 in the conference for the 3rd year in a row, getting all kinds of questions. Coach is under fire. Coach literally asked this week for a vote of confidence from his athletic director. To me, that's just not a very good sign when you're out asking for something like that. And then, again, we mentioned the quarterback, Jackson Arnold, watching the end of that game against Missouri the other night, and those overtimes, they had the ball twice for -2 yards, and Arnold just looked like he had no confidence to do anything to win that game last week. And so I can't put a lot of confidence in him going on the road. I think the wild card in this game is, and Freeze has hinted that, he may go to Deuce Knight in this game. Now, is Deuce Knight ready, or is Freeze doing that because he's I gotta say my job mode? And so I don't like the dynamics of Auburn at all in this game. I think Arkansas is in a much better mental state of mind in this game to win this. So I think Arkansas will win the game. Give me Arkansas 34, Auburn 24. Sweets, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I think Arkansas blows doors here. I got Arkansas 52-27 here. They've just scored out the wazoo since Petrino's taken over. Nobody's been able to stop them offensively. They're averaging almost 200 yards a game more than Auburn. Arnold looks like he forgot how to play the position. The kid just looks so uncomfortable out there. It's tough to watch. And this may be the final nail in the coffin of the good Reverend Hugh Freeze over on the plains. I really think that Arkansas lays the wood to Arkansas this weekend. Where does that take us, D-Mac?
I think if you lose, this is the final nail.
Yeah, so this takes us to Missouri at the at Sweets fighting Pavia's Vanderbilt. Sweets, get us started on this game.
Look, 2-6-1 teams here fighting for their playoff lives in the SEC. This is going to be a great game. Number 15, Missouri travels to number 10 Vanderbilt. It's a 2:30 game. I think it's the game of the week, if I'm not mistaken. Game of the week at Vanderbilt. Who'd have thunk, huh? Anyway, again, both teams are 6-1. Vanderbilt has what was that?
It is game day. You're right.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Mizzou's been hot lately, though. They're averaging over 45 points a game in their last four contests. Along with that stat, they're averaging over 600 yards a game in those last four contests, too. So they've really got things cooking offensively. Clark Lee does at Missouri, but they don't have Diego Pavia, and Vanderbilt does. And as LSU found out this weekend, if Pavia gets loose, he's going to give you nightmares. And I think he gets loose a little bit against Mizzou. Mizzou's a disciplined team, and I think that they're going to, I think it's going to be a close game. I'm going to go ahead and take Vanderbilt at home I'm going to take Vanderbilt 24-23. 1-point game win. Vanderbilt keeps their playoff hopes alive and keeps it rolling. What are your thoughts on this game, D?
Yeah, both teams have high-powered offenses and kind of do the same thing. Missouri's really good at running the ball, running for about 245 yards a game. Vandy's running for about 215, and they're both passing for around the 240 mark. I know with some of the competition Missouri's played this year, their defensive numbers are skewed. Yeah, they're only giving up 239 yards a game, which puts them in the top 5. And then the Vanderbilt defense is a top 30 defense, giving up 315 yards a game. I think what Missouri does really well is they control the time of possession. They're holding the ball for nearly 35 minutes a game. So on the road at Vanderbilt, they're going to want to shrink this game as much as possible. I think LSU showed a little bit that there is the ability to run the ball on Vanderbilt, if you execute that well. And that's what Missouri does really well. They've got Ahmad Hardy, who's ran for 840 yards and 11 touchdowns. Backup Jamal Roberts has been really good as well. So I think they're going to really try to pound the football against this Vanderbilt defense. And on the defensive side of the ball for Missouri, if they watched the LSU Vandy game last week, they at least know what not to do to contain Diego Pavia. So if they just do the opposite of that, I think Missouri can win this game. I do think it's going to be a close one, but give me Missouri in a 28-24 game on the road. And they shut down the Fighting Pavias this week. Kevin, what do you have?
So both these teams are very similar on offense. They both like to run the ball and get things going with different formations with RPOs and that type of stuff. Get out on the edge. A lot of zone running type plays. Both love time of possession. You mentioned Missouri at 35 minutes. Vanderbilt does the same. Vanderbilt's opponents only average 9 possessions a game from them having the ball so much. You're 100% correct that you can run on Vandy a little bit. LSU showed that. Alabama showed that. And then I like the aspect that you referenced that Missouri's, while they're really good defensive stat wise, they've done that against, a really weak out of conference teams that they've played. That also being said, they have played 2 SEC teams who moved the ball early on them really well, and then Missouri settled in and played well defensively in the second half. Only gave up 325 yards to Bama. So I think that shows that they can contain a team. And South Carolina had 300. Kind of hard to gauge South Carolina because they're not that good offensively either. The one stat that to me is the difference in this game, again, is if we go to that turnover margin piece. Missouri is -2 in the turnover margin. Vanderbilt's +4. And so this game is it's going to come down. Both these teams are going to have 8 or 9 possessions. That's all they're going to have because of the style that both teams play. So it's to me, it comes down to which team makes 1 or 2 mistakes with the ball, and I get to that point, and I trust Pavia more than I trust Prabula. I don't trust Prabula passing wise yet. I felt like last week they were very fortunate to win that game against Auburn. If Auburn does anything offensively, and Prabula struggled passing in that game also, just like he did against Bama. So I think Vanderbilt will scheme, defensively to try to make him pass the ball because I think that's Missouri's weakness is him throwing the football. And I think the turnover margin will end up in Vandy's favor like it has for the year. Give me Vandy in this game and a game that'll be close and fun to watch. Fairly high scoring with 2 defenses, but again, give me Vandy 30, Missouri 24.
Nice. That takes us to our next game. We're heading to Stark Vegas for this one. The Texas Longhorns traveling to play Mississippi State. Texas is coming off a really, really hard fought win at Kentucky. Somehow they escaped that one with a 16-13 win. Texas is a 7.5 point favorite on the road against Mississippi State. Few things about the Texas team. They're 81st in the country on offense, 368 yards. They're passing for about 320, running for about 145, and they're only scoring 26 points a game. Their defense, though, has been pretty good, giving up 279 yards a game and only giving up 11.3 points per game. Then you flip over to Mississippi State. Pretty good offense, 106 yards a game. They're running the ball really well for 178 yards a game, averaging about 32 points a game. And then on defense, they're giving up about 187 passing yards a game and 164 rush yards and giving up 20 points per game. This, to me, both teams are really good in the turnover margin. Mississippi State's +5, Texas is +7. Texas did cause quite a few turnovers against Oklahoma a few weeks ago. To me, this game, kind of like the last one for you, Kevin, comes down to which quarterback I trust the most. And through, 8 weeks of a football season, if I had to roll the dice and pick one, I lean Blake Shapen here. If I trust him more to get it done. We saw how bad Texas was on the road from an offensive standpoint against Kentucky last week. Mississippi State's defense is a lot better there. So I'm going to roll Mississippi State getting a win in this one. I'm going to go 21-16 in this one. Mississippi State gets a win, their first SEC win of the season. They were an interception by a defensive lineman away last week from getting a win. So, Sweets, who do you have in this one?
I'm going to take Texas. I don't think they're going to score a lot of points. They haven't all year, and I don't think they start at Mississippi State on Saturday. I'm going to take Texas 24-17 here. I think that Texas defense is enough to keep. And they may even get a score against Mississippi State's offense. One of the keys for me with Mississippi State and why I didn't predict them is Fluff Bothwell is probably not going to play in this game. And he's a stud. He's a workhorse. So they've got veteran Devon Booth, who was the man for him last year that Buffalo beat out. But I like Texas to go into Stark Vegas and get a win here, 24-7. It doesn't look pretty, but they put one in the W column. What do you got here, Kev?
Yes, turnover margin. Both these teams have done well in it. Texas +7, Mississippi State +5. I'm with you, D-Mac. I trust Shaven more than I trust Arch. Oh, Arch had a good game against Oklahoma, and they have a good defense on a neutral site in a moment. I also thought Sarkisian called probably his best game of the year in that Texas game. Really called a game that was built around a conservative passing game that let Arch build some momentum. I think when you look at Mississippi State, sometimes you go on the road and lose, but yet it builds momentum because of the way you play. And you take that loss and you build off of that. And I think that you're going to see them this week. They beat Arizona State. They lost a tough game at home against Tennessee by 3. And then they lost at Florida last week. If they don't throw that interception, they may kick a field goal and win that game. So I agree with those things. So I like Mississippi State in this game just because I think both offenses will struggle at times. Texas because of their defense. Well, Mississippi State offense because of Texas defense will have some moments where they struggle. Texas offense will struggle because of the quarterback play on the road. I think they'll contain Manning. So give me Mississippi State also. I'll ring the cowbell, go to Stark Vegas. Stark Vegas is going to party on Saturday night because they're going to beat the Longhorns, and that's still going to mean a lot to them. Give me Mississippi State 23.
Love that. So that brings us to Alabama traveling to South Carolina. What do you like in this one, Kev?
Yeah, so look, we could give a lot of stats in this game, and they're all going to be one sided. From a yards per offense to turnover margin, Alabama's +9. South Carolina's defense gives up a lot of rushing yards too. I just this you got two teams with opposite trajectories. Alabama's playing as good as anybody in the conference, and South Carolina's got people banged up. They got 3 offensive linemen hurt, and Dylan Sampson got hurt last week. So it's just not a good place, I don't think, for South Carolina to be in. I think, they'll come out and they'll fight. They might keep this game close for a half. It's a 13.5-point spread. I think Alabama covers that spread. I think Alabama wins this game 31-13. I just don't think it's going to be that close. What's your thoughts, Sweets?
I'm with you. I've got it Alabama 38, South Carolina 10. At the end of the day, Lenore Seller's been a big disappointment this season, along with Nussmeier and Arch. Those 3 stud quarterbacks that we all picked at the beginning of the year are all near the bottom of the SEC. So, at the end of the day here, Alabama has got things rolling. Kalen DeBoer has got these guys cooking. Ty Simpson's playing great. Ryan Williams, one of the best receivers in the country. On defense, Keon Sabb, is back and he's ready to go. I just think they're too much in every phase of the game for South Carolina. There's just South Carolina's going to offer no resistance here. What are your thoughts on this one, D?
Yeah, I think this is a game where the Alabama offense is going to really roll. Ty Simpson is in that Heisman conversation right now. Almost 2,000 yards passing, 18 touchdowns, 1 interception. Yeah, there's one name on this Alabama offense, though, that hasn't gotten involved nearly as much as he would like to or the Alabama coaching staff would like him to, and that's Ryan Williams. 2 weeks ago, he had 1 target. He did end up recording 87 yards on 5 catches. I think you see him get involved a little bit more. I'm going to go a 45-13 win for the Crimson Tide in this one. I think they just kind of roll through this one. So this brings us to
Don't forget the name Mike Shula, the offensive coordinator at South Carolina. We all know how that ended for him in Alabama, and he's bringing that same karma to South Carolina right now. But anyhow, go ahead.
Yeah, that brings us to the Tennessee at Kentucky game. Get us started on that one, Sweets.
Tennessee's coming in at 5-2. With a win, they become bowl eligible. They will get that win against Kentucky this weekend. I think that Josh Heupel, Tennessee still got an outside shot at the playoff here, sitting at 5-2. They're scoring 33.5 points a game. They're passing the ball well. They're just under 2,000 yards on the season, 604 rushing yards. They've got it going in all facets of the game. I think the biggest thing here isn't who's going to win the game, but how bad is Tennessee going to beat them? I think that again they're still looking keep their playoff hopes alive. They want to be a part of that again. Kentucky is just bad, regardless of how they looked at Texas last week. They are bad. I think Tennessee blows doors here. I like Tennessee 45-14 in an ugly one. Joey Aguilar goes for 300 plus here. Deshaun Bishop goes for $150 with a couple tutties. I just don't think Kentucky has anything for Tennessee this weekend. And this loss also will create a little more talk in Lexington about the possibility of Mark Stoops leaving the program. What are your thoughts on this one, D-Mac?
All right, Kevin, what do you think of this game?
Yeah, look, Tennessee's got a high-powered offense. They've scored 34 points in every game, with the exception of last week in that Alabama game. They had that costly turnover at half. If they score there, that game's a little different. I think Alabama still wins. I think we would have had a competitive second half without that turnover. And I just referenced that because that would have put them at 27 points. Look, I see Tennessee's offense going into Kentucky and scoring a lot of points, and I don't see Kentucky being able to keep up. Offensively, Kentucky's very challenged. There's still, I guess Cutter Bowley is their quarterback now. That's the way it seems. And he's shown a little bit of life. But again, Kentucky struggles to get 20 points a game. So I just don't see this as a good game for them. I think if you go back like the last 30 years, Kentucky's only beat Tennessee like one time, and that was a few years ago on the road. So give me Tennessee in this game, 30-17. They handle Kentucky and get back on into the playoff hopes that they have is to win out.
Yeah, I'm gonna take Tennessee in this one as well. I think it's like a 10.5 point game. I think Tennessee's gonna win this one 38-6. Kentucky's gonna get 2 field goals at home, but won't score a touchdown. And I think Joey Aguilar is gonna really roll, and Deshaun Bishop's gonna have a great game running the rock. So that brings us to the Texas A&M at LSU game. This game currently sits at 2.5 points favoring the Texas A&M Aggies. I'll get us started on this one. So LSU backs are up against the wall. They're playing a home game at night. There's a lot of things working in their favor. Texas A&M, since joining the SEC, has not won in Tiger Stadium. So a lot of things outside of the game of football that favor the Tigers in this one. But then when you get down to the numbers in this one, Texas A&M's offense led by Marcel Reed is averaging about 465 yards a game. Marcel Reed's thrown for nearly 1,800 yards, 15 touchdowns to 4 interceptions. Reuben Owens has ran for nearly 400 yards, 3 touchdowns. Then you go to their wide receiver room. You've got Mario Craver and KC Concepcion, who have combined for, a little over 1,000 yards, roughly 1,200 in the receiving game. LSU's coming off a loss. A&M got a big win on the road. The one thing that I will say about the Texas A&M defense is it's been pretty solid this season, only giving up 320 yards a game. But on the road between Notre Dame and Arkansas, they're giving up 41 points per game when they're on the road. Now, LSU's offense is only scoring about 26 points a game. And if you count only FBS opponents for LSU, it's about 20 points per game. So when you look at that LSU offense, quarterback play has gotten better. Garrett Nussmeier played a pretty solid game against Vanderbilt. You've got talent in the running back room with Caden Durham and Harlem Berry. You've got Tradez Green at tight end. And you've got some talent in the wide receiver room with Aaron Anderson, Xavion Thomas, Varian Brown, Kyle Parker. But it all starts with offensive line. And that's where LSU's been horrendous this year. If you don't have good offensive line, doesn't matter how good of a play caller you have at the offensive coordinator position, nothing's going to work when you have poor offensive line play. That's where LSU is right now. So I'm going to lean the Aggies in this one. I think they're going to run a bit of a conservative offense, though. I think they're going to try to run the ball a lot more in this one and try to not make a mistake by turning the ball over. So if you look at that LSU Florida game in September, DJ Lagway threw 5 interceptions. Texas A&M is going to avoid that at all costs, try to really limit their passing game. So I think I'm going to roll Texas A&M. I'm going to go 28, LSU 17. Wait, who do you have in this one?
I'll give my score prediction first. I think Texas A&M wins 38-17. I don't think that. Well, first of all, LSU struggles with dual threat quarterbacks. I mean, Pavia had his way with us, and he is nowhere near as athletic as Marcel Reed is. And I still have PTSD from what Reed did to us last year. So the biggest matchup issue for LSU in this game is Texas A&M's defensive line is dominant. Our offensive line is horrible. I just don't see any way that we wake up this week and all of a sudden start being more effective in the run game and get better play calling and all that. I just don't. I just think it gets ugly, and I think that the calls for Kelly's job get a little louder. Not that that's going to change anything, But I do think that Texas A&M beat down this weekend will make it a lot more uncomfortable for that staff as the season progresses. What are your thoughts, Kev?
Yeah, and there's so many things you look at this game that don't favor LSU. Cassius Hall's leading the conference with 8.5 sacks, and your left tackle got hurt last week for LSU. That doesn't bode well for LSU. LSU's been about middle of the pack on third down conversions, converting on 45%. Texas A&M's defense is second on third down conversions, only giving up 22%. The reason I bring that stat up is because LSU's tends to be in a lot of third and distance situations, third, six, third, seven, third, and eight. If they play this game against that defense where the interior of Texas A&M's defensive line, you can't have some success running up inside. But if they can turn their defensive ends loose and get up the field and pressure Nussmeier, that it's going to be a really, really real long night. Vanderbilt and Nussmeier dropped back to pass 30 times last week, and Vanderbilt had 13 pressures. They defensed LSU a little different than most teams have for this year, in that a lot of teams have played soft and made Nuss throw underneath and do some different things. Vanderbilt showed a different approach. They rushed 7 a lot of times, and they came after him. I think you're going to see A&M do the same thing. Nussmeier does not show a propensity to sometimes want to step up in that pocket and make a throw and take the hit. Now, he did take some hits last week against Vandy and played a little tougher, but I just think that's what you're going to see A&M do. And so third and long will get LSU beat this weekend. They got to be better on first and second downs. Turnover wise, LSU's +2, A&M's +1. So pretty much the same there. I really think, LSU's defense last week played their worst game of the year, and a lot of it was discipline and fundamental stuff. Proper angles. They took a lot of inside angles on Pavi and let him get outside. They didn't tackle well. I think, LSU is good defensively. They only gave up to 24 against Ole Miss, and it took Ole Miss 90-some plays to do that. So I think you'll see a lot of pride in that LSU defense, show this week. I do expect Weeks back, even though we've not heard anything definite on that. But I expect him back this week. I think you see Baker have them play with a lot more pride, and they'll contain um, A&M's offense. The matchup that I'm really looking forward to in this game, though, is Mansard Delane against Concepcion. Mansard Delane has been the best cornerback in college football. Concepcion is one of your best wide receivers in college football, and they're going to be matched against each other. And I'm going to the game, and I'm really looking forward to watching that matchup. Can Delane shut Concepcion out? If he does, then that's going to make it tough on A&M moving the football. So, all those things being said, a couple other factors here. Texas A&M has not won in Baton Rouge since they joined the SEC, and it's a night game. Kelly's only lost one game at night in Baton Rouge. That was last year at Alabama. So I think, I do think Death Valley will bring some magic this week. I think LSU will play with a lot of pride in this game. I think it'll be a very hard fought game. I think their defense plays better, and I think they manage the games. I think you'll continue to see Kelly more involved in the offense. Offense showed strides last week at Vanderbilt, scored 5 of the 6 first possessions, and the only possession they didn't score on was when they missed a 52-yard field goal, or they would have scored on their first 6 possessions. So I think you'll continue to see that. Look, you can throw the ball on A&M. And A&M, like you mentioned, DMAC has given up some points on the road. So I think you'll see LSU attack A&M some effectively this week. And I just think that defense is going to pull a game out with a turnover or so late. I like LSU's secondary. I know I'm going to be the only one to pick this, but give me LSU 27, first time they score over 25. Give me LSU 27-24 over Texas A&M, a Death Valley crowd game. It is sold out. Here's one other thing that's interesting coming up for this game. 70% chance of rain. It could be sloppy. So who's going to fight the hardest and manage those turnovers in what potentially could be a sloppy weather game?
I wish you would have picked A&M with us, because in games that are within a 3-point line where we all pick the same team, the opposite happens. So the
Every
LSU A&M will be a good game. So that wraps up our game breakdowns for the week. Sweets, any last thoughts before we wrap up?
Just going to be another great week of college football. We're going to continue to separate the contenders from the pretenders. A few games will met that out this weekend. We hoping to see a little more fight out of the Bayou Bengals this weekend. Want to see some pride restored. Looking forward to some great games. Looking forward to the BYU game. I'm looking forward to seeing Miami's going to win the game, but I just want to see how they look against Stanford. I'm going to watch that one too. So I'm just looking forward to the weekend and hope to see some great football. What do you got, Kev?
Yeah, so again, we're at that point of the season that every weekend you're going to see some teams get either knocked out of contention or take a blow. And so we got those games again this week. You got South Florida, Memphis fighting for that playoff spot. You got Vandy and Missouri. Who would have thought? Well, both those teams are fighting for that playoff spot. You've got LSU. I don't think they're going to get in the playoffs, but they're fighting for that playoff spot against A&M, who, if they were to win this game, puts themselves in a very good position for that playoff spot. So you've got a lot of those games that, play into that role. It's going to be another great Saturday. I don't know if it's going to be as good as the last 2 weekends, but there's going to be enough games and there's going to be enough of that, playoff drama that it's going to be out there for teams that it'll be a fun, interesting Saturday. D-Mac, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think what I'm looking forward to most this week, and I didn't touch on it in the preview of the LSU A&M game, but two really bright assistant coaches. You've got Colin Klein calling the offense for Texas A&M. You've got Blake Baker calling the defense for the LSU Tigers. So I think that's going to be a really interesting matchup to see, whether it's the defense making adjustments or maybe the offense for A&M making some adjustments at halftime. It's going to be interesting to see those two guys duel it out all night and see who comes up on top this week. And then I'm going to make a bold prediction in the Missouri game. Last week against LSU, Diego Pavia did the Heisman pose. I think Ahmad Hardy has a moment that puts him in contention for the Heisman. He's going to strike a Heisman pose up in Nashville this week. Those are my final thoughts. Thanks for everybody who tuned in this week and listened to us. We will be dropping our high school and our final picks podcast on Thursday. If you haven't already liked and subscribed and followed us on social media and YouTube, go ahead and do that now. Thanks for listening, guys. We'll talk to you soon.
Great week.